Good evening, or perhaps I should say, good morning. Is the world too loud for you tonight? Don't worry, the doors are locked and the fire is lit. You are safe here in the archives. I was just looking at this old map. It tells the story of a forgotten empire since neither of us can sleep. Why don't we explore it together? Make yourself comfortable. Let's begin. That summer, the rain deep in the Qinling Mountains seemed like it would never stop. Raindrops fell on the bluestone slabs, fell on the thatched roofs, fell on the soldiers' already soaked armor. The air was filled with the scent of earth mixed with rust, the unique smell of war and nature intertwined. In Xing'an Prefecture, Shanxi, what is now Ankang City, nestled among the mountains, there was a long, narrow gorge that locals called Chexiang Gorge. Chexiang Gorge, as the name suggests, was shaped like a narrow train carriage. On both sides were steep cliffs, and in the middle was a winding path wide enough for only a few people to walk abreast. Deep in the gorge, clouds and mist swirled, and even at noon, sunlight could barely penetrate the layers upon layers of mountain haze. At this moment, this gorge was witnessing a hunt that should have changed the course of history. Let's turn back time a little to understand how this hunt began. The peasant uprisings of the late Ming Dynasty did not erupt overnight. It was like a chronic disease quietly spreading through the empire's body for many years. In the first year of Chongzhen, that is, 1628, the first large-scale peasant uprising broke out in northern Shanxi. That year, northern Shanxi suffered a severe drought. Crops yielded nothing, yet the court's taxes were collected in full without a single coin. Lest the starving farmers realized that rather than sit and wait for death, they might as well take a desperate gamble, so they picked up hoes, sickles, and even sharpened wooden sticks, and began their resistance. At first, these uprisings were nothing more than scattered sparks. A village here, a county town there, quickly snuffed out by government troops. But the more they tried to extinguish the flames, the more they spread, burning ever brighter. By the 7th year of Chongzhen, the year our story begins, the fires of rebellion had already swept across 5 provinces: Shanxi, Henan, Huguang, and Sichuan. The leaders of the rebel armies also grew from initially nameless nobodies into figures that gave the court headaches. Gao Yingshang, known as the Chuang Wang, or Dashing King, was the most prestigious leader among the peasant armies at the time. Zhang Shanzhong, nicknamed the 8th Great King, was known for his ferocity and brutality. There was also a young man named Li Zikeng, who at this time was merely a general under Gao Yingxiang's command, obscure and unknown, yet quietly gathering his strength in the shadows. Faced with such a situation, the young Chongzhen emperor sat on the dragon throne in the Forbidden City, his brow tightly furrowed. He was only 17 when he ascended to the throne, yet he inherited an empire riddled with problems. He was diligent, frugal, and hands-on with everything, reviewing memorials until late into the night every day, trying to turn the tide. But he soon discovered that the empire's problems were far more complex than he had imagined. He needed someone who could quell this rebellion for him. Chongzhen's gaze fell upon an official named Chen Qiyu. Chen Qiyu, courtesy name Yushuan, was from Baodai, Shanxi. He had served as the governor of Yansui and performed excellently in battles against the peasant armies, achieving considerable military merit. Emperor Chongzhen believed this man was capable of handling great responsibilities. Thus, he issued an edict appointing Chen Qiyu as Vice Minister of War, with supreme command over the military affairs of 5 provinces: Shanxi, Henan, Huguang, and Sichuan. Governor-General of 5 provinces, what a prestigious title this was. In the Ming Dynasty's bureaucratic system, a governor-general was the highest military and administrative official in a region, and one who could command 5 provinces simultaneously was exceedingly rare. That Emperor Chongzhen entrusted such a heavy responsibility to Chen Qiyu showed the depth of his trust and expectations for this minister. Chen Qiyu did not disappoint the emperor's expectations, at least not in the beginning. After taking office, he immediately set about reorganizing military affairs, mobilizing troops from various provinces, and launching a large-scale campaign to encircle and suppress the peasant army. His strategy was advance separately, attack together, ordering various government forces to attack simultaneously from different directions, compressing the peasant army into a narrow area, and then annihilating them in one fell swoop. This strategy achieved remarkable success at first. The peasant army was chased by government forces, fleeing in all directions and suffering heavy losses. Major leaders like Gao Yingshang, Li Zikeng, and Zhang Shanzhong had no choice but to lead their remnants to retreat southwest, trying to hide in the towering mountains deep within the Qinling range. And this was exactly what Chen Qiyu had been waiting for. Let us return to Chexiang Gorge. It was the height of summer in the 7th year of Chongzhen, and continuous rain had been falling for a full 40 days. The roads in the gorge were muddy and impassable, streams were swelling, and flash floods could break out at any moment. For any army, this was the worst possible marching environment. But for the fleeing peasant army, they had no choice. Gao Yingxiang, Li Zikang, Zhang Shanzhong, and others led tens of thousands of defeated soldiers stumbling into Chexiang Gorge. They had originally hoped to use this gorge to cross the Qinling Mountains and escape to Sichuan, but what they didn't expect was that Chen Qiyu had already stationed heavy forces at both ends of the gorge. By the time the peasant army realized they were trapped in the gorge, it was already too late. Both the entrance and exit of the canyon were blockaded by government troops, and the cliffs on both sides were as steep as if cut by a knife, completely impossible to climb. Tens of thousands of people were trapped in this long, narrow canyon, no way forward, pursuers behind. Worse still, the continuous rain caused the grain they carried to quickly mold and spoil. The bowstrings lost their elasticity after being soaked, and all the gunpowder became damp and unusable. Hunger, disease, and despair began to spread among the peasant army. Chen Qiyu stood on the hillside outside the canyon, looking down at those figures struggling like cornered beasts below, a smug smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. He knew that in just a few more days, these rebels would completely collapse from hunger and disease. When that time came, he would only need to send troops into the canyon to clean up the aftermath. This would be the most glorious victory of his life. He had already begun drafting in his mind the memorial to report the victory to the emperor. However, deep within the canyon, another game was quietly unfolding. Li Zikeng, this man who would later storm into Beijing and drive the Chongzhen emperor to his death, was at this moment squatting on a wet rock, staring at the campfire before him that was about to die out. His face was covered with mud and exhaustion, but his eyes were unusually calm. He was thinking. He knew that if they continued to hold out like this, only death awaited them. The government troops didn't need to attack, they only needed to wait. Wait until they starved to death, died of disease, or killed each other. But he also knew that the government troops had a fatal weakness. That was greed. In the late Ming officialdom, corruption had seeped into every corner. From high officials in the capital city to petty clerks on the frontier, almost no one was free from greed. Although Chen Qiyu was the governor-general of 5 provinces, the advisors, confidants, and generals around him were equally a bunch of insatiably greedy parasites. Li Zicheng decided to take a gamble. He sent people carrying gold, silver, and treasures plundered from various places to secretly contact those around Chen Qiyu. His terms were simple. The peasant army was willing to surrender and accept the court's amnesty, but hoped to retain some of their armed forces to continue serving as government troops. This condition seemed very reasonable. In fact, the Ming Dynasty's policy toward peasant uprisings had always been suppression and pacification combined. Many peasant army leaders chose to surrender when they had no way out, and the court would often accept them, incorporating them into the government forces to deal with other rebels. The people around Chen Qiyu took the money and began whispering in his ear. They said these rebels had nowhere left to turn, and rather than expending effort to exterminate them, it would be better to accept their surrender. This would both reduce government troop casualties and allow them to claim credit and rewards from the court. Chen Qiyu hesitated. In a sense, Chen Qiyu was not a bad person. He could even be called a capable and ambitious official, but he had a fatal weakness. He wanted success too badly. He wanted too much to prove to Emperor Chongzhen that he was trustworthy, too much to leave behind the glorious name of suppressing the rebellion in the history books, too much to end this prolonged war as soon as possible. And accepting the surrender of the peasant army seemed to be the quickest shortcut to achieving all of this. So he made a decision that would be criticized by countless people in the future. Accept the surrender of the peasant army, allow them to keep their weapons, and disperse them in batches to return home. When this news reached the canyon, Li Zikeng could hardly believe his ears. He had originally just been trying his luck, never expecting the government troops to actually fall for it. He suppressed the wild joy in his heart, put on a terrified and humble appearance, and led his men out of the canyon to surrender to Chen Qiyu. Chen Qiyu looked at these ragged, emaciated, surrendered soldiers, his heart filled with the joy of victory. He didn't notice that in these people's eyes there was none of the fear and submission that true surrenderers should have. He even less noticed that at the moment Li Zikeng walked out of the canyon, the corners of his mouth slightly curved upward, revealing a meaningful smile. After the peasant army surrendered, Chen Qiyu kept his promise and divided them into several small groups, sending a small number of government troops to escort them back to their hometowns. But these escorting government troops soon discovered a terrifying fact. Those peasant rebels who appeared to have been defeated, once they left the surveillance range of the government troops, immediately transformed as if they were different people. They killed the escorting soldiers, regrouped together, picked up their weapons, and raised the banner of rebellion once again. Moreover, they were fiercer than before, more united and more unstoppable, because they had seen through the weakness of the government troops. They knew that those seemingly imposing soldiers were actually nothing but a greedy, stupid, and vulnerable rabble. They knew that with enough gold and silver anyone could be bought. They knew that this empire had already begun to rot from within. The siege at Chexiang Gorge should have been the Ming Dynasty's best opportunity to suppress the peasant uprising. If Chen Qiyu had chosen to launch a direct assault at that time, or at least chosen to completely disarm the peasant army, history might have taken a completely different direction. But he didn't. He chose to believe those advisors who had taken bribes, chose to believe those rebels who feigned surrender, chose to use the easiest way to achieve victory. As a result, he let loose a pack of hungry wolves. And this pack of hungry wolves would do something that would shock the world in the coming year. The 8th year of Chongzhen, 1635 AD, Henan and Anhui. The breakout at Chexiang Gorge was like a boulder thrown into a calm lake, with ripples spreading in all directions. Those peasant army leaders who escaped from the canyon did not, as Chen Qiyu had hoped, obediently return to their villages to farm. Instead, they roamed like a pack of enraged wolves through the heartland of the empire, searching for their next prey. In the first month of the 8th year of Chongzhen, while the northern lands were still covered in ice and snow, a secret gathering was taking place in a ruined temple in Xingyang, Henan, Xingyang. This ancient town, located in the heart of the Central Plains, had been a strategic military location since antiquity. During the Chu-Han contention, Liu Bang and Xiang Yu had faced off here during the Three Kingdoms period. Cao Cao had also stationed troops here, and now this place was about to witness another moment that would change the course of history. In the main hall of the ruined temple, over a dozen men in tattered clothes, but with blazing eyes, sat around a bonfire. The firelight flickered across their faces, now bright, now dark, like some ancient ritual. They were the leaders of the 13 camps of the peasant army, representing the 13 most powerful rebel forces of the time: Gao Yingxiang, Zhang Xiangjong, Luo Rosai, Li Zikeng. These names that would later leave their mark boldly in the history books were all gathered in this dilapidated temple. The bonfire crackled, breaking the brief silence. Gao Yingxiang spoke first. As the Chuang Wang, he enjoyed the highest prestige among the peasant armies. His voice was deep and powerful, echoing through the empty hall. Brothers, although we narrowly escaped from the Battle of Chexiang Gorge, our strength has been greatly depleted. The imperial troops may be foolish, but they have the advantage of numbers. If we continue fighting separately, sooner or later we'll be picked off one by one. Everyone fell silent. They all knew Gao Yingxiang was speaking the truth. Over the past few years, though, the peasant army had made a great show of force. They had always lacked unified command and a clear strategy. They were like headless flies running east and west, causing the court plenty of trouble but never forming a real threat. At that moment, a young voice broke the silence. "I have a plan." Everyone turned toward the voice. It was Li Zikeng who had spoken. Li Zikeng stood up and walked over to the bonfire. The firelight illuminated his angular face and also lit up the profound gleam in his eyes. "The imperial troops' advantage lies in their numbers. Our advantage lies in mobility." His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and forceful. "If we gather together, we'll only become a target for the imperial troops. But if we spread out and strike from different directions simultaneously, the imperial troops won't be able to handle everything at once." He squatted down and drew a simple map on the ground with a branch. "My suggestion is divide our forces with set directions and strike from all four sides. One group heads east into Shandong, one group heads south into Huguang, one group heads west back to Shanxi, one group heads north to threaten the capital region. Let the imperial troops exhaust themselves running around, unable to protect both head and tail." Upon hearing this, everyone nodded in agreement. The plan was simple and clear, yet struck at the heart of the matter. But Zhang Xianzhong let out a cold laugh. "Splitting forces in different directions sounds nice, but once we scatter and fight separately, won't we just be back to the old ways?" His voice was sharp and grating. I have a better idea. Everyone's gaze turned to Zhang Shong. This man, nicknamed the Eighth Great King, was known for his ferocity and brutality. A dangerous gleam flickered in his eyes like a beast poised to strike. Rather than fleeing everywhere, why not do something big? Something that will make the court tremble and shake the world. What big thing? Gao Yingxiang asked. The corners of Zhang Shong's mouth curled up, revealing a sinister smile. Fengyang, Fengyang. This name held special significance in the Ming Dynasty. It was the hometown of Ming Taizu Zhu Yanzhong, the place where the dragon arose for the great Ming Dynasty. Zhu Yanzhong was born here, grew up here, and it was from here that he began his magnificent life. Outside Fengyang City stood a grand imperial mausoleum, the Ming Imperial Mausoleum. Here lay buried Zhu Yanzhong's parents and ancestors. It was the ancestral tomb of the Zhu clan. According to traditional Chinese feng shui beliefs, an ancestral tomb was where a family's dragon vein resided, determining the rise and fall, glory and disgrace of future generations. Within Fengyang City, there was also a famous temple, Huanghe Temple. This was where Zhu Yanzhong became a monk in his youth. Although he later became the son of heaven, he never forgot this temple that changed his fate. He ordered the reconstruction of Huanghe Temple, expanding it into a grand imperial monastery, and bestowed upon it the name Longsing Temple. Fengyang, for the Ming imperial family, was a sacred and inviolable holy land, and Zhang Shanzhong's plan was to desecrate this holy land. Attacking Fengyang and burning the imperial tombs, this is not merely a military operation. Zhang Shang's voice echoed through the ruined temple. This is a signal to tell the world the dragon veins of the great Ming have been severed, and the Zhu clan's fortune has run out. After hearing this, everyone exchanged glances. This plan was too bold to the point of madness. But it was precisely this madness that filled them with an inexplicable excitement. Gao Yingxiang pondered for a moment, then slowly nodded. Good, let's do it. The Xingyang conference thus came to an end. The 13 leaders reached a consensus, divide forces in set directions, strike out on all fronts, and the most important route among them would be personally led by Gao Yingxiang and Zhang Shong, heading straight for Fengyang. When they walked out of the ruined temple, the horizon had already begun to show the pale light of dawn. The bitter wind of the first month howled past, sweeping up the remnant snow on the ground. No one knew that this cold morning would become the starting point of the great Ming Dynasty's downfall. In the latter part of the first month, the peasant army began to move. The main forces led by Gao Yingxiang and Zhang Shanzhong set out from Henan, advancing rapidly toward the southeast. They avoided the major cities heavily guarded by government troops, taking only small paths, hiding by day and moving by night, like a silent viper quietly closing in on Fengyang. The prefectures and counties along the way had almost no defenses. Local officials were still immersed in the festive atmosphere of the new year, never imagining that a disaster was about to strike them. In early February, the peasant army arrived outside Fengyang City. Although Fengyang was the birthplace of the dragon, its defenses were surprisingly weak. Far from the frontier, it had been peaceful for many years, and the stationed troops had long become lax and lazy. When the vanguard of the peasant army appeared outside the city, the garrison even thought it was a passing merchant caravan. By the time they realized what was happening, it was already too late. The peasant army surged into Fengyang City like a tide. The garrison put up brief resistance before completely collapsing. Officials, gentry, and wealthy households in the city scattered in all directions to save their lives. The entire city fell into chaos. But the peasant army didn't stay in the city for long. Their target was the Imperial Mausoleum and Longsing Temple outside the city. Let's zoom in and come to that moment that changed history. The 15th of February outside Fengyang City, the Ming Imperial Mausoleum. It was a gloomy day. The sky was covered with lead-grey clouds, as if foretelling an impending disaster. The red walls and yellow tiles of the Imperial Mausoleum appeared particularly glaring under the dim sky, like a silent mockery. Zhang Xianzhong sat on his horse, overlooking the magnificent tomb before him. His face showed no expression, but in his eyes burned a complex flame: hatred, excitement, and a trace of barely perceptible fear. He knew that what he was about to do would completely change his fate. Do it. His voice was soft, yet it exploded like a thunderclap in the silent mausoleum grounds. The peasant army soldiers swarmed forward and began demolishing the mausoleum structures. They toppled stone tablets, smashed ritual vessels, and looted all the burial goods from the tomb. Some even tried to dig open the burial chamber, but Zhongshan stopped them. He knew that excavating an imperial tomb was a grave crime of treason, and even he dared not easily cross that line. But burning the surface structures was enough. Raging flames devoured the mausoleum's halls, memorial archways and spirit roads. Thick smoke billowed up, obscuring half the sky. Those meticulously carved stone statues, those priceless ritual vessels, those buildings that had carried over 200 years of imperial majesty, all turned to ashes in the flames. At the same time, another squad of peasant soldiers stormed into Longsing Temple. Longsing Temple, the temple where Zhu Yanzhang once became a monk, could not escape its fate at this moment either. Peasant army soldiers rushed into the main hall, toppled the Buddha statues to the ground, and set the scriptures ablaze. They scrawled insulting slogans on the temple walls and held drunken revelries in the Buddha hall. It is said that Zhangshang also ordered a wooden sign to be erected on the ruins of Longsing Temple, which read, "Jiajing Emperor, I have arrived." This was a provocative statement. The Jiajing Emperor was an emperor during the mid-Ming Dynasty, known for his devotion to Taoism and neglect of state affairs. Zhangshang used this phrase to mock not just Jiajing, but the entire Ming imperial family. The Great Fire of Fengyang burned for 3 whole days and nights. By the time the news reached Beijing, it was already late February. The Chongzhen Emperor was reviewing memorials in the Palace of Heavenly Purity. When he saw the report of Fengyang's fall and the burning of the imperial tombs, the vermilion brush in his hand fell to the ground with a clatter. His face instantly turned deathly pale. Fengyang, that was the resting place of his ancestors, the very foundation of the great Ming Dynasty. And now, this sacred land had been trampled and burned by a group of bandits. For any Ming emperor, this was an unbearable disgrace. Emperor Chongzhen slowly rose to his feet and walked to the window outside. The glazed tiles of the Forbidden City gleamed in the sunlight, everything appearing so peaceful, so serene. But he knew this tranquility was merely an illusion. In the heartland of the empire, a storm was brewing. He thought of his ancestor Zhu Yuanzhang, that cowherd boy who walked out of Fengyang, relying on extraordinary wisdom and courage, overthrew Mongol rule and established the great Ming Dynasty, and now his descendants couldn't even protect their ancestral tombs. Emperor Chongzhen's eyes gradually grew moist, but he quickly held back his tears. He knew tears couldn't solve any problems. What he needed was action, revenge, to tear those rebels who desecrated his ancestors limb from limb. He immediately issued an edict to severely punish the negligent officials of Fengyang. Fengyang Governor Yang Yaipeng was arrested and brought to the capital, executed shortly after. Fengyang Garrison Commander Zhu Guoxiang was also stripped of his post and investigated. At the same time, Emperor Chongzhen ordered a nationwide intensification of the campaign against the peasant armies, vowing to exterminate these roving bandits to the last man. But what he didn't know was that the Fengyang disaster was only the beginning. Those peasant armies retreating from Fengyang were not intimidated by the government troops' pursuit. On the contrary, the victory at Fengyang greatly boosted their confidence. They began to believe that this seemingly invincible empire was actually nothing but an empty shell, strong on the outside but hollow within. And in the distant north, another empire was rising. The ruler there was closely watching the situation in the central plains. He knew that the Ming dynasty's internal turmoil would be his best opportunity to realize his ambitions. The 9th year of Chongzhen, 1636 AD, Shenyang and Shanxi, as the great fire in Fengyang gradually died down, in the distant northeast, another fire was brewing. It was an invisible flame burning in the heart of a nation. Shenyang, this ancient city situated on the Liaodong Plain, was now shrouded in a solemn atmosphere. In the 4th month of the 9th year of Chongzhen, spring's arrival was belated, and patches of snow still lingered on the fields outside the city, but the streets within the city were already decorated with lanterns and banners flying, because today was a special day. Hong Taiji, the great Khan of later Jin, the 8th son of Narasi, was about to hold a grand ceremony. On this day he would announce a new dynastic name, one that would completely change the course of East Asian history. Let us turn back time a little to understand the significance of this moment. The Jurchen, this ancient people, had lived for generations between the White Mountains and Black Waters. They made their living by fishing and hunting, with horsemanship and archery as their foundation, thriving and multiplying in the vast forests and snowy plains. In the early years of the Ming Dynasty, the Jurchen tribes submitted to the Great Ming and were divided into 3 major groups: Jianzhou, Haixi, and the Wild Jurchens. They paid tribute to the Ming Dynasty with sable furs, ginseng, and Dongju pearls in exchange for silk, tea, and ironware. For a long time, the Jurchens and the Ming Dynasty lived in peace, and one could even say they were mutually dependent. But this tranquility was shattered at the end of the 16th century, in the 11th year of the Wanli reign, that is, 1583 AD. A young man named Nahasi raised an army with 13 sets of inherited armor and began his campaign to unify the Jurchen tribes. His father and grandfather had both died in a Ming military operation, which became an eternal scar in his heart and the driving force behind his resistance against the Ming dynasty. Nahasi was a genius military strategist and politician. He created the 8 banners system, integrating the scattered Jurchen tribes into an efficient military machine. He invented the Manchu script, giving the Jurchens their own writing system. He established the later Jin regime, standing as an equal rival to the Ming dynasty. In the 46th year of the Wanli reign, that is 1618 AD, Narasi issued the 7 grievances and formally declared war on the Ming dynasty. From that moment on, the flames of war in Liaodong never ceased. At the Battle of Sahu, the Ming army suffered a devastating defeat, with 4 columns of troops nearly annihilated. Liaoyang and Shenyang fell one after another, and vast territories of Liaodong fell into the hands of the later Jin. The Ming dynasty had no choice but to retreat to Shanhai Pass, relying on this natural barrier to hold back the later Jin cavalry. In the 11th year of Tiaming, which was 1626 AD, Nahasi was wounded by the Ming army's red-coated cannons beneath the walls of Ningyuan city, and died of illness shortly after. His 8th son Huang Taiji inherited the position of Khan and continued his father's unfinished cause. Huang Taiji was more seasoned and far-sighted than his father. He knew that the Ming dynasty could not be conquered by military force alone. What he needed was a grander strategy, one that could fundamentally shake the Ming dynasty's rule, and the first step of this strategy was to change the later Jin's dynastic name. The 11th day of the 4th month in the 9th year of Chongzhen, at the altar of heaven outside Shenyang city. It was a clear day. A few white clouds floated in the azure sky, and the spring breeze gently brushed the withered grass on the plains. Around the altar of heaven, soldiers of the 8 banners stood in formation, banners fluttering in the wind, armor gleaming bright. Huang Taiji wore a bright yellow dragon robe, and a crown inlaid with Dongju pearls, slowly ascending to the highest point of the altar of heaven. Behind him were the princes and nobles of the 3 great groups, Manchu, Mongol, and Han armies, as well as envoys who had traveled from afar from Shosian. The master of ceremonies read the sacrificial text aloud, his voice echoing across the open plains. The content of the text was to report to the gods of heaven and earth that the later Jin Khan Huang Taiji was about to ascend the throne as emperor, changing the dynastic name to Great Qing and the reign title to Chongde. The moment the sacrificial text was finished, Huang Taiji faced south, performed 3 kneelings and 9 kowtows, completing the enthronement ceremony. From this moment on, the name latter Jin became history, replaced by a brand new dynastic title, Great Qing. Why Qing? Regarding this question, historians have various opinions. Some say the character Qing contains water, which can overcome the Ming of the Ming dynasty. The character Ming contains fire. Some say Qing sounds similar to Jin, paying tribute to the ancestral Jin dynasty. Others say the character Qing implies clarity and righteousness, representing Huang Taiji's aspirations for the new dynasty. Regardless of the true reason, the dynastic title Great Qing began its nearly 300-year history from this point on. Huang Taiji stood atop the altar of heaven, gazing down at the vast land beneath his feet. His eyes crossed over Shenyang city walls, over the plains of Liaodong, over the mighty Shanhai Pass, toward that distant, prosperous empire that was struggling in the midst of turmoil. He knew that empire was experiencing an unprecedented crisis. The flames of peasant uprisings were spreading across the central plains. The court's armies were exhausted from constant deployment. The treasury was empty, and the people were suffering. This was the opportunity he had long awaited, but he also knew the timing wasn't quite ripe yet. Though the Ming dynasty was weakened, a starving camel is still bigger than a horse. The defensive line at Shanhai Pass remained solid. He needed patience, needed to wait. Wait for the day that empire would completely collapse from within. Until then, what he could do was continuously harass, exhaust, and weaken the Ming dynasty's strength. Meanwhile, in the central plains, another great drama was unfolding. Let us shift our gaze from Shenyang back to the Central Plains. In the summer of the 9th year of Chongzhen, among the mountains of Shanxi, a heart-pounding chase was underway. Gao Yingxiang, the peasant army leader who called himself the Chuangwang, was leading his remnant forces in a westward flight. Behind him was the elite government army led by Hong Changzhou, the newly appointed governor-general of 5 provinces. Hong Changzhou, this name holds special significance in late Ming history. He was Chen Qiyu's successor, and a figure far more shrewd and ruthless than Chen Qiu. He would not make the same mistakes as Chen Qiu, would not easily trust the peasant army's surrender, and would not give them any chance to catch their breath. Since taking over as governor-general of 5 provinces, Hong Changzhou had launched a relentless campaign to suppress the peasant army. His strategy was simple: pursue relentlessly, giving the enemy no chance to rest. He personally led the cavalry, marching day and night, biting tight onto the peasant army's tail and never letting go. Gao Yingxiang was chased until he had nowhere left to run. He had originally planned to cross the Qinling Mountains from southern Shanxi and enter Sichuan, but Hong Changzhou had long anticipated his intentions and had stationed heavy troops at every pass. Gao Yingxiang had no choice but to change his route, attempting to cross the Qinling Mountains via a rarely traveled path. That path was called Ziwu Valley. Ziwu Valley, this name holds a special place in Chinese military history. During the Three Kingdoms period, Zhuge Liang, the Prime Minister of Shu Han, launched northern expeditions against Tao Wei. His general Wei Yan once proposed a bold plan: lead an elite force through Ziwu Valley to launch a surprise attack on Chang'an and seize Guangzhong in one stroke. But Zhuge Liang considered this plan too risky and did not adopt it. Ziwu Valley was dangerous because it was an extremely treacherous mountain path. The valley road was narrow and winding, with sheer cliffs on both sides. Once ambushed, there was almost no possibility of escape. Gao Yingxiang chose to take Ziwu Valley out of desperation. He thought that the government troops would never think to set up defenses on this rarely traveled path. But he was wrong. Hong Changzhou had not only thought of it, but had long since laid an inescapable trap in Ziwu Valley. In the 7th month, Gao Yingxiang led his remaining forces into Ziwu Valley. At first, everything went smoothly. Though the valley road was treacherous, they encountered no resistance. Gao Yingxiang began to let his guard down, thinking he had already escaped to safety. But when he reached the middle section of the valley, disaster struck. Ambushing soldiers poured out from the cliffs on both sides, arrows raining down like a storm. The peasant army was caught off guard and immediately fell into chaos. On the narrow valley road, men and horses trampled each other, cries and screams filling the air. Gao Yingxiang tried to organize resistance, but it was all in vain. In such terrain, numerical advantage meant nothing. It only became a burden. The peasant army was divided into countless small groups, each fighting on their own, and was soon annihilated one by the government troops. In the chaotic melee, Gao Yingxiang was struck in the shoulder by a stray arrow and fell from his horse. He struggled to get up, but several government soldiers had already rushed to him. Chuangwang Gao Yingxiang was captured just like that. Gao Yingxiang was escorted to Beijing and thrown into the Ministry of Justice's prison. Emperor Chongzhen personally issued an edict demanding the harshest punishment for this chief criminal. The humiliation of the Fengyang disaster, the hatred from the burning of the imperial tombs, all would be settled on this man. August, West Market, Beijing, the execution ground. It was a sweltering day. The sky was covered with heavy clouds, and the air was filled with a suffocating humidity. Around the execution ground, crowds of commoners had gathered to watch. They wanted to see with their own eyes what this Chuang Wang, who had given the court headaches for years, actually looked like. Gao Yingxiang was brought to the execution ground. His body was covered with wounds, his face pale, but his eyes remained defiant. He didn't beg for mercy, didn't cry. He just quietly looked at the curious, excited, or indifferent faces around him. The method of execution was lingqi, an extremely cruel form of death penalty, where the flesh would be cut from the prisoner's body piece by piece, letting him die slowly in extreme agony. It is said that throughout the entire execution, Gao Yingxiang never let out a single scream. He just clenched his teeth tightly, using his last willpower to maintain his dignity. When he finally breathed his last, cheers erupted across the execution ground. The common people believed that the death of this chief criminal meant the end of the peasant uprising. But they were wrong. Although Gao Yingxiang was dead, his cause had not ended. After his death, His subordinates elected a new leader, a man who would bring about the complete downfall of the Ming Dynasty in the years to come. That man was Li Zikang. After Gao Yingshang's death, his remaining forces fell into leaderless chaos. The various commanders each had their own ideas. Some wanted to surrender to the court, some wanted to fight on their own, and some wanted to elect a new leader. The debate went on for days without any resolution. In the end, it was Li Zikang who stepped forward. Although King Chuang Gao is dead, our cause cannot end here. His voice was calm yet resolute. The court won't spare us. Surrender means certain death. Our only way out is to keep fighting. He looked around at those weary, confused, or despairing faces. I am willing to carry on King Chuanggao's legacy and lead everyone to continue the fight, but I won't force anyone. Those who want to follow me, stay. Those who don't, may leave on your own. Silence. Then, one man stepped forward and knelt on one knee. I am willing to follow General Li. Then came a second person, a third, a fourth. More and more people knelt down, pledging their loyalty to Li Zikang. And so, Li Zikang became the new King Chuang, but he knew that the situation he faced was even more difficult than during Gao Yingxiang's time. Hong Changzhou's encirclement campaigns were becoming increasingly fierce, and the peasant army's living space was shrinking. He needed a new strategy, one that could help him survive in desperate circumstances. He thought of Chexiang Gorge. That time they had escaped the government army's encirclement through bribery and deception. But the same trick couldn't be used twice. Hong Changzhou wasn't Chang Shiyu. He wouldn't fall for it. What Li Ziking needed was a more brilliant strategy. He began to think, to observe, to wait. He knew that opportunity would come eventually. As long as he could stay alive, opportunity would surely come. And in distant Shenyang, Huang Taiji was also waiting. Two who waited, two trajectories of fate, slowly converging toward the same direction. The 10th year of Chongzhen, 1637 AD Shaanxi, and the central plains of the spring of the 10th year of Chongzhen brought no hope whatsoever. The sky over Shaanxi hung like a faded grey cloth above people's heads. Day after day the sun rose, the sun set, yet not a single drop of rain fell. The wheat seedlings in the fields trembled in the dry wind, then gradually turned yellow, and finally became a stretch of dead, scorched earth. This was already the third consecutive year of severe drought. The elders said this was heaven punishing the mortal world. But what they didn't know was that this drought was merely the prelude to an even greater catastrophe. When summer arrived, the locusts came. They rose like a black cloud from the eastern horizon, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. They landed in the fields, on the trees, on the rooftops of houses. They devoured everything: green crops, weeds, leaves, even the clothes people had hung out to dry in their yards. After the locusts passed, only barren desolation remained on the land. Hunger began to spread. The villagers first ate through their stored grain, then began eating tree bark, grass roots, and guanyin clay. Some started selling their children, some fled their homes, and some began eating people. The history books recorded this year's tragedy in 4 characters: people eating people. Behind these 3 characters lay countless shattered families, countless lost lives, and countless unspeakable tragedies. And on this starving land, the war between the peasant armies and the imperial forces continued. Beijing, the forbidden city, the palace of heavenly purity. The Chongzhen emperor was receiving an audience with someone. That person was Yang Xichang, then serving as minister of war. He was a thin, middle-aged man with a gaunt face and sharp eyes. His father, Yang He, had once served as supreme commander of the 3 borders and advocated a policy of pacification toward the peasant armies. As a result, he was stripped of his position and imprisoned after the pacification failed, eventually dying in despair. Yang Xichang inherited his father's talent, but not his father's mercy. He knew well that appeasement would never work against the peasant armies. The only solution was complete annihilation. Your Majesty, Yang Xichang knelt before the imperial desk, his voice steady and powerful. I have a strategy that can pacify the roving bandits. The Chongzhen emperor raised his head, a glimmer of hope flashing in his weary eyes. Speak. Yang Xichang drew a memorial from his sleeve and presented it with both hands. My strategy can be summarized in 10 characters, 4 cardinals, 6 corners, 10 nets spread wide. He began to explain the plan in detail. The so-called 4 cardinals referred to the 4 provinces of Shanxi, Henan, Huguang, and Jiangbei. each to be assigned a governor responsible for defending their own province. The so-called Six Corners referred to the six provinces of Yansui, Shanxi, Shandong, Jiangnan Jiangxi, and Sichuan, each to be assigned a governor responsible for assisting the four cardinals in the encirclement campaign. 10 provinces, 10 great nets, layer upon layer of encirclement, pressing in step by step. Yang Xichang's voice grew increasingly impassioned. No matter where the roving bandits flee, they will run into our nets. As long as we persist, within 3 years the bandits will be destroyed. The Chongzhen Emperor listened and remained silent for a long time. He knew this plan required massive armies, massive provisions, and massive amounts of time. And these were precisely what he lacked most. But he also knew he had no other choice. Approved. Yang Xichang's 10-sided net plan thus began to be implemented. In the second half of the 10th year of Chongzhen, the government troops launched a large-scale suppression campaign. Hong Chengcho was stationed in Shanxi, commanding the military operations in the northwest. Under his command were fierce generals like Zhuo Liangyu, Cao Bianzhao, and He Renlong with strong troops, fine horses, and high morale. Life became increasingly difficult for the peasant army. They were chased by government troops fleeing everywhere, in these mountains today, by that river tomorrow, and who knows where the day after. They had no fixed base, no stable food supply, and not even enough weapons and equipment. Many began to waver. Some chose to surrender. They laid down their weapons, knelt before the government troops begging for mercy in exchange for a way to survive. The government troops' attitudes toward these surrenderers varied. Some were incorporated into the government army, some were sent back to their hometowns, and others were secretly executed. Some chose to hide. They took off their peasant army clothes, blended in among ordinary people, pretending they had never participated in the uprising. They worked in the fields, traded at the marketplace, carefully concealing their past. But some chose to persist. Li Zikong was one of them. The Shangluo Mountains, located in southeastern Shanxi, are an extension of the Qinling Range. Here the mountains are high, the forests dense, and the ravines crisscross. A natural hiding place. Since ancient times it has been a gathering place for fugitives, refugees, and bandits. Although the government troops were numerous and powerful in such terrain, it was difficult for them to leverage their advantages. Li Zikeng led his remaining forces and retreated into the Shangluo Mountains. This was one of the most difficult moments in his life. After Gao Yingshang's death, although he had inherited the title of Chuang Wang, his strength was far less than before. Fewer and fewer people followed him. Fewer and fewer people were willing to support him, and fewer people believed he could succeed. But he didn't give up. Deep in the Shangluo Mountains, Li Zikeng began a long period of lying low. He gathered his remaining soldiers, recruited new men, trained his troops, and built up his strength. He knew this wasn't the time to strike. He needed to wait for the right opportunity. Life in the mountains was harsh. Food was scarce, clothes were tattered, weapons were crude. Many couldn't endure such a life and chose to leave, but some stayed behind. They believed in Li Zikeng, believed he could lead them out of their predicament. Li Zikeng often sat alone on the mountain cliff, looking down at the cracked earth below. He saw starving villages, saw fleeing crowds, saw an empire that was collapsing. He knew his opportunity was right there. As long as he could survive, the opportunity would surely come. Unlike Li Zicheng's persistence, Zhang Xianzhong chose a different path. In the 10th year of Chongzhen, under the heavy encirclement of government troops, Zhang Xianzhong made a surprising decision to surrender. He sent someone to submit a letter of surrender to the government troops, expressing his willingness to lay down his arms and accept the court's amnesty. The government generals were skeptical but ultimately accepted his surrender. Zhang Xianzhong was placed in Gucheng, Hubei nominally a surrendered rebel leader, but in reality a prisoner under house arrest. But did Zhang Xianzhong really intend to turn over a new leaf and behave himself from then on? Of course not. His surrender was merely a delaying tactic. He needed time to rest and reorganize his troops, time to gather strength, time to wait for the right moment. During his days in Gucheng, Shang appeared obedient and compliant on the surface, but secretly he was contacting his former subordinates, recruiting new soldiers and stockpiling weapons. Like a dormant viper, he quietly waited for the moment to strike. The government troops weren't entirely unaware of this. Someone reported to the court that Zhang Xianzhong had surrendered but not disbanded, gathering followers as before, and suggested eliminating him completely. But the court was busy dealing with peasant armies in other directions and had no time to attend to Zhang Xiongzhong. They thought that as long as they kept Zhang Xiong confined in Gucheng, he couldn't cause any major trouble. They were wrong. Zhang Xiongzhong's fake surrender was merely the calm before the storm. At the end of the 10th year of Chongzhen, Yang Xichang's 10-sided net plan seemed to be showing initial results. The rebel army's area of activity was greatly compressed. Many rebel forces were eliminated or surrendered, and the situation in the Central Plains seemed to be improving. Emperor Chongzhen finally breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that the roving bandits problem that had plagued the empire for years was finally going to be resolved. But this was only a surface calm, deep in the Shangluo Mountains. Li Zikeng was quietly gathering his strength. In the military camp at Guchang, Zhang Xianzhong was secretly planning another uprising. In the vast countryside of Shanxi, Henan, and Huguang, starving peasants were waiting in despair for a savior, and in the distant Liaodong, Huang Taiji was training his troops and preparing for the next attack on the Ming Dynasty. Beneath the surface calm, undercurrents were surging. This empire was like a castle built on sand, looking magnificent and grand, but in reality could collapse at any moment. All it would take was one small wave to wash it away, and that wave was coming soon. Let us zoom in and come to a night deep in the Shangluo Mountains. It was the 12th month of the 10th year of Chongzhen, and several heavy snowfalls had already blanketed the mountains. Li Zikeng and his men were crammed into a cave, huddled around a bonfire for warmth. The firelight illuminated their faces, tired, hungry, yet still defiant faces. Li Zikeng gazed at the dancing flames, lost in thought. He recalled his past. He was once a courier delivering official documents along the government roads, living an ordinary and stable life. But when the court abolished the courier stations, he lost his job, lost his livelihood, and eventually took the path of rebellion. He thought of Gao Yingxiong, that once mighty Chuang Wang who ultimately met the fate of being beheaded. His head was hung on the gates of Beijing for public display. His body was executed by Lingqi, and everything he had turned to nothing. Would he meet the same fate? Li Zikeng didn't know, but he knew he had no way out. Surrender. The government troops wouldn't spare him hide. His name was already on the court's wanted list. His only choice was to keep fighting until victory or death. The bonfire crackled. Interrupting his thoughts, a young soldier came over and handed him a piece of roasted rabbit meat. "General, have something to eat." Li Zikeng took the meat and bit into it. The meat was tough, with almost no flavor, but on this cold and hungry night, it was a rare delicacy. "What is your name?" he asked the young man. "This humble one is called Lu Zongmin." Li Zikeng nodded and said nothing more. What he didn't know was that this young man named Lu Zongmin would later become one of his most capable generals, and would also make a fatal mistake in the capital city. But that is a story for later. At this moment, on this cold winter night, they were just a group of people struggling to survive in desperate circumstances. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring, didn't know if they could survive this winter, didn't know if their cause would succeed. But they knew that as long as they still had breath in their bodies, they would never give up. The bonfire gradually dimmed, and the cave fell into silence. Outside, heavy snow was falling, covering the entire Shangluo Mountains, and beneath this vast white snowfield, a seed was quietly sprouting. At the 11th year of Chongzhen, 1638 AD, inside and outside the Great Wall, in the autumn of the 11th year of Chongzhen, smoke signals rose once again from the beacon towers along the Great Wall. It was a heart-stopping signal. Whenever the smoke signals rose, it meant the enemies from the north had come again, and this time it was the iron cavalry of the Great Qing. Huang Taiji had been waiting for 2 years. 2 years ago he ascended the throne in Shenyang and proclaimed himself emperor, changing the dynasty's name to Great Qing. For 2 years he had been building up his military strength, training his troops, waiting for the right moment. Now the moment had finally arrived. He had received intelligence that the Ming Dynasty's main forces were in the Central Plains suppressing the peasant armies, leaving the northern defenses vulnerable. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. In September, Huang Taiji personally led his army and broke through the Great Wall at its weak points, entering the interior. The Qing army split into 2 routes, one led by Dorgan, entering through Changziling Pass, the other led by Yuechuo, entering through Qingshangguan Pass. The 2 armies were like 2 sharp blades, stabbing straight into the heartland of the Ming Dynasty. The Great Wall, this barrier that had protected the Central Plains for hundreds of years, was rendered useless under the iron hooves of the Qing army. The Ming soldiers guarding the passes either died or fled, completely unable to stop the Qing army's assault. The Qing army drove straight in, as if entering an uninhabited land. They burned, killed, and plundered, committing every evil imaginable. Wherever they passed, everything was reduced to scorched earth. Inside Beijing, panic spread everywhere. Emperor Chongzhen urgently summoned his ministers to discuss countermeasures. Some advocated defending Beijing and waiting for reinforcements from various regions. Some advocated negotiating peace with the Qing army, exchanging gold and silk for peace. Others advocated relocating the capital to Nanjing to avoid the Qing army's sharp edge. The debate continued for several days, but no conclusion was reached. Finally, Emperor Chongzhen made a decision to send Lu Shangsheng to lead the army against the enemy. Lu Shangsheng, courtesy name Jiando, was from Yixing, Jiangsu. He was a military general who came from a scholarly background. He had passed the imperial examination as a jinshi, yet chose to abandon the pen for the sword. He was tall and powerfully built, with immense strength. It was said he could draw a bow requiring 300 jin of force. He governed his troops with strict discipline, always leading from the front, charging ahead in every battle, never retreating. Before this, Lu Shangsheng had been fighting against the peasant armies in the Central Plains. He was Hong Chengchou's capable assistant, and one of the opponents the peasant armies feared most. His troops were called the Tianshang Army, one of the most elite forces of the late Ming Dynasty. But now, he had been transferred to the north to face an even more terrifying enemy. After receiving his orders, Lu Shangsheng immediately led his army northward. He knew this was a war almost impossible to win. The Qing army was strong with high morale, while his own troops were exhausted from years of continuous warfare. More importantly, there were serious disagreements within the court over whether to fight or seek peace. Minister of War Yang Xichang advocated for peace negotiations. He believed that the Ming Dynasty's primary task at present was to eliminate the peasant armies, and they should not be fighting the Qing army at the same time. He suggested negotiating with the Qing army, exchanging gold and silk for peace, and then having a decisive battle with the Qing army after eliminating the peasant armies. But Lu Shangsheng firmly opposed peace negotiations. The Qing barbarians have invaded our territory and slaughtered our people. This is an irreconcilable blood feud. He spoke passionately in court. If we negotiate peace with them, we abandon our ancestors' land. We disregard the lives of our people. I would rather die than comply. Emperor Chongzhen was caught in a dilemma. He neither wanted to go to war with the Qing army nor bear the stigma of negotiating peace. In the end, he made a compromise. He appointed Lu Shangsheng as supreme commander of all relief forces. Responsible for resisting the Qing army, meanwhile, he secretly sent people to contact the Qing army to explore the possibility of peace negotiations. This was a fatal mistake. Lu Shangsheng was nominally the supreme commander of all relief forces, but in reality, he had few troops to mobilize. Armies from various regions were either suppressing peasant rebels in the Central Plains or watching and waiting. No one was willing to come to his aid. Yang Xichang made things even worse, obstructing him at every turn, denying him provisions, denying him reinforcements, and even secretly sabotaging his military operations. Lu Shangsheng became an isolated minister. In December, Lu Shangsheng led his mere 5,000 troops and encountered the Qing army at Julu. Jululu, this name holds special significance in Chinese history. 1800 years ago, it was here that Shang Yu smashed his cooking pots and sank his boats, decisively defeating the Qin army and laying the foundation for Qin's destruction. But Lu Shangsheng was not Shang Yu. He didn't have Shang Yu's forces, nor did he have Shang Yu's luck. He faced tens of thousands of elite Qing troops, while he had only 5,000 exhausted soldiers. He requested reinforcements. But Yang Xichang ignored him. He requested provisions. But the Ministry of Revenue made endless excuses. He was like an abandoned orphan, facing the surging enemy alone. But he did not retreat. "I have received the nation's grace, and I only regret not finding a place to die," he told his men. "In today's battle we advance. There is no retreat." On the 11th of December, the Qing army launched a full-scale assault. Lu Shangsheng, clad in iron armor and wielding a great saber, personally led the cavalry charge into enemy lines. His figure darted back and forth across the battlefield, and wherever he went, Qing soldiers fell. His armor was soaked in blood, some from enemies, some his own. But he had too few men, 5,000 against tens of thousands. It was a battle with no suspense. Though the Ming soldiers fought bravely, they gradually couldn't hold against the Qing army's human wave tactics. The lines began to collapse. Soldiers began to flee. Fewer and fewer men remained by Lu Shangshang's side. His warhorse was shot dead, so he fought on foot. His saber was bent from use, so he used his fists. His armor was pierced by arrows, blood gushing from his wounds, yet still he fought on. In the end, he was completely surrounded by Qing troops. Dozens of spears thrust into his body simultaneously. He fell upon the soil of Julu, fell upon the homeland he had sworn to protect with his life. Lu Shangshang killed in battle at the age of 39. After Lu Shangshang's death, his body lay on the battlefield for 3 days before it was found. It is said that when they found him, his body bore over 70 wounds, his armor completely soaked through with blood, yet his eyes remained wide open, dying with eyes unclosed. When news of his death reached Beijing, the Chongzhen emperor was shocked, but Yang Xichang submitted a memorial saying that Lu Shangshang had recklessly advanced while underestimating the enemy, bringing destruction upon himself, and should not be given too high an honor. The Chongzhen emperor hesitated for a long time, and in the end only gave Lu Shangshang a posthumous title of Zhongli, loyal and heroic, hastily concluding the matter. Lu Shangshang's family collected his remains and prepared for burial, but they discovered that in Lu Shangshang's coffin besides his body, there was nothing, no gold or silver, no jewels, not even a single decent piece of clothing. This general who had fought for his country for many years was utterly destitute in death. His wife, overcome with grief, wrote an elegy, asterisks, a loyal heart serving the nation. Crimson blood flows, thine pre-solitary devotion through the ages illuminates the divine land. Pitiful white bones buried in the wilderness, I Findi, yet his heroic spirit still guards the 9 provinces. Asterisk Lu Shangshang's death was the most tragic scene of the late Ming Dynasty. He did not die by enemy swords, but by the court's internal strife, by his colleagues' scheming, by the incompetence and indifference of a decaying empire. He was a lone minister, an abandoned lone minister, but until death he never betrayed his convictions, until death he never abandoned his duties. With his own life, he composed a tragic elegy. After Lu Shangshang's death, the Qing army faced no more resistance. They rampaged across the North China plain, burning, killing, looting, and committing every atrocity imaginable. Jinan, Dezhou, Lingqing, Gaotang. One city after another fell under the Qing army's iron hooves. One village after another turned to ashes in the Qing army's flames. According to historical records, this Qing incursion lasted for half a year. They breached over 70 cities, captured more than 460,000 people, and plundered countless gold, silver, and treasures. The land of North China was devastated, its people suffering untold misery. When the Qing army finally withdrew beyond the passes, laden with spoils, they left behind a wasteland. Once prosperous cities became rubble, once wealthy villages became wilderness, once laughing people became bones. Emperor Chongzhen stood atop the walls of the forbidden city, gazing at the northern sky. Speechless for a long time, he knew this empire was sliding step by step into the abyss. In the north, there was the threat of the Qing army. In the central plains, there was the devastation of peasant rebels. Within the court, there were endless factional struggles. He was like a helmsman struggling in a storm, desperately trying to steer this broken ship to a safe harbor. But the waves were too fierce. He was already overwhelmed. And in the distant Shangluo Mountains, another disaster was descending. Let us turn our gaze from North China back to Shanxi. Just as Lu Shangshang was dying in battle at Julu, Li Zikeng was also experiencing the darkest moment of his life. In the winter of the 11th year of Chongzhen, Hong Chengchou launched a large-scale encirclement campaign against the Shangluo Mountains. He mobilized forces from 3 provinces, Shanxi, Henan, and Huguang, closing in on the Shangluo Mountains from all directions. Li Zikeng was forced to leave his mountain base where he had been lying low for over a year, breaking out westward. But Hong Chengchou had long anticipated his intentions. On a plain south of Tongguan, the government troops had set up an ambush, waiting for Li Zikeng's arrival. That plain was called Nanyuan. When Li Zikeng led his troops into Nanyuan, thunderous battle cries suddenly erupted from all directions. Government soldiers poured out from the hillsides, from the woods, from the tall grass surrounding the peasant army completely. It was a massacre. The peasant army retreated steadily under the government assault, suffering heavy casualties. Li Zikeng desperately tried to organize resistance, but it was all in vain. His men fell one after another, his war horses were shot dead one after another. In the chaos of battle, fewer and fewer people remained by Li Zikang's side. Finally, when he managed to fight his way out of the encirclement, he found that only 18 people remained following him. 18 riders. From tens of thousands of troops to 18 riders, Li Zikang lost everything in a single night. He gazed at the blood-soaked battlefield behind him, at the bodies of his fallen comrades lying on the ground. His heart filled with despair. It is over. Everything is over. His cause, his dreams, his everything all turned to nothing in this single night. But Li Zikang did not die. He led his remaining 18 men and fled deep into the dense forests of the Shangluo Mountains. It was a primeval forest rarely touched by human feet, with ancient trees reaching toward the sky and thorny thickets everywhere. Though the government troops had superior numbers, they could not pursue in such terrain. They searched outside the mountains for several days, found nothing, and finally had to retreat. Li Zikang survived, but his situation was more dire than ever before. 18 men, no food, no weapons, no horses, not even a single intact piece of clothing. They were like a pack of beasts, hunted by predators. Hiding here and there in the deep mountains, barely clinging to life, Mani urged Li Zikang to give up. "General, the tide has turned against us. Why not find a place to live under a false name and spend the rest of your days in peace?" But Li Zikang shook his head. "I, Li Zikang, am the Chuang King's man in life, and his ghost in death." His voice was hoarse but resolute. "As long as I have breath in me, I will not give up." He gazed at the distant sky, a strange light flickering in his eyes. "Look," he pointed at the cracked, parched land below the mountain. "There are millions of starving people down there, waiting for us. As long as we can survive, as long as we can stand up again, they will follow us." He turned around and looked at his remaining 17 comrades. "We will rise again, I promise you." That was the winter of the 11th year of Chongzhen, deep in the Shangluo Mountains, beside a faint bonfire. 18 people, 18 unyielding hearts, 18 undying flames. What they didn't know was that their perseverance would change the entire history of China in the years to come. The 12th year of Chongzhen, 1639 AD, Hubei and Shanxi. In the spring of the 12th year of Chongzhen, the peach blossoms in Guchang. Hubei bloomed. Pink petals swayed gently in the breeze, drifting down onto the streets paved with bluestone slabs. Vendors hawked fresh fruits and vegetables by the roadside. Children chased and played in the alleys. Everything seemed so peaceful and serene. But beneath this calm, a storm was brewing. Zhang Shong had been surrendered in Guchang for nearly 2 years. For 2 years, he appeared obedient and compliant on the surface, paying taxes to the government office on time, regularly expressing loyalty to the court. He even shaved off his beard and changed into a scholar's robe, looking just like a law-abiding country gentleman. But the people sent by the government office to monitor him noticed some abnormalities. In Zhang Shanzhong's camp, the number of soldiers increased rather than decreased. He nominally had only 3,000 men, but in reality had secretly recruited over 10,000 new soldiers. In his warehouses, grain and weapons piled up like mountains, far exceeding the scale a surrendered rebel army should have. Samon reported these situations to the court, suggesting that Zhang Shong be eliminated as soon as possible, but the court was busy dealing with the Qing army's invasion and peasant armies in other directions, and had no time to pay attention to this already surrendered minor figure. They thought Zhang Shong had already been tamed. They were wrong. On a night in May, the sky over Guchang was covered with dark clouds. Zhang Shong stood in his tent, gazing at the pitch-black night outside the window. A fanatical gleam flickered in his eyes, and a cold smile hung at the corner of his mouth. "The time has come," he said in a low voice. That night, Zhang Shanzhong summoned his trusted generals and announced a shocking decision: to revolt once again. "Brothers," his voice was deep and powerful, "for these 2 years we have endured humiliation and hardship, sleeping on brushwood and tasting gall, all for this day. The court thinks we have been tamed, they have let down their guard. Now is the time for us to strike back." The generals shouted in unison, "We are willing to follow the general through fire and water." At dawn the next day, the people of Gucheng were awakened by earth-shaking battle cries. Zhang Shanzhong led his army in a sudden attack on the government troops stationed in the city. Caught off guard, the government troops were utterly defeated. Supervising censor Zhang Dajing was captured. County Magistrate Ruan Jidian was killed, and the entire Gucheng fell into Zhang Xianzhong's hands overnight. Zhang Xianzhong stood on the city tower looking at the cheering soldiers below, and burst into loud laughter. "You court dogs, do you think Zhang Xiong is easy to fool?" His voice echoed in the morning wind. "Today I'll show you what it means to rise from the ashes." When news of the Gucheng rebellion reached Beijing, the court was shocked. Emperor Chongzhen flew into a rage, ordering severe punishment for the officials who had advocated for recruiting Zhang Xiongzhong, while simultaneously mobilizing a large army to prepare for another suppression campaign. But Zhang Xiong didn't give them the chance. He led his army swiftly out of Gucheng, marching westward, conquering cities along the way with unstoppable momentum. The flames of the peasant army burned once again across the central plains. Meanwhile, deep in the Shanglo mountains of Shanxi, another man was also preparing for his comeback. Li Zicheng had been hiding in the deep mountains for nearly a year. During this year, he endured hardships beyond ordinary imagination. Without food, he led his men to hunt and gather fruits. Without weapons, he used wooden sticks and stones. Without clothes, he wore animal skins and leaves. They lived like savages deep in the mountains, isolated from the world, fighting against heaven, fighting against earth, fighting against fate. But he never gave up hope during those long nights. He often sat alone on the cliff, gazing at the dark land below. He knew that down there were countless starving people, waiting for a savior. As long as he could survive, as long as he could stand up again, they would follow him. Gradually, news began to come from outside the mountains. Zhang Xiong had risen up again in Gucheng. The government troops were dispatched to suppress Zhang Xianzhong, leaving the defenses around the Shangluo mountains weakened. The famine grew more severe, and more common people could no longer survive. Li Zikeng knew his opportunity had come. In the summer of the 12th year of Chongzhen, Li Zikeng led his men and quietly emerged from the Shangluo mountains. They were no longer the defeated army that had fled in panic a year ago. After a year of hardship, they had become more resilient, more united, and more eager for victory. The flames of vengeance burned in their eyes, and their hearts were filled with hope for the future. When they emerged from the deep mountains, what greeted them was a land cracked from drought and countless hungry faces. Those common people looked at Li Zikeng as if they were seeing their savior. They surged forward, knelt on the ground, and cried out, "The Chuang King is here! The Chuang King is here! Chuang King, save us! We're about to starve to death." Li Zikeng gazed at these emaciated people, and an indescribable emotion welled up in his heart. He jumped off his horse, helped up the old man kneeling on the ground, and declared loudly, "My fellow villagers, I, Li Zikeng, have returned. From now on, follow me, and you'll have food to eat and clothes to wear." Cheers resounded through the sky. At that moment, Li Zikeng knew his cause had begun anew. In the latter half of the 12th year of Chongzhen, the peasant army's power rapidly recovered. Zhang Xiong rampaged across the Huguang region, capturing cities and seizing territory, while the imperial troops were run ragged trying to keep up. Li Zikeng rose again in Shanxi, his forces rapidly expanding from 18 men to several thousand, then to tens of thousands. They were like two wildfires spreading rapidly across the parched plains, impossible to extinguish. Yang Xichang's 10-sided net plan had completely collapsed. That carefully woven net had been torn to shreds by Zhang Xiong and Li Zicheng. The imperial troops were stretched thin, exhausted from running back and forth, yet they could never completely wipe out the peasant armies. The Chongzhen emperor was at his wit's end. He couldn't understand why these roving bandits were like weeds, cut down one crop and another grows back, impossible to kill off completely. He couldn't understand why his armies, despite their superior numbers, could never defeat these ragged peasants. He couldn't understand why his empire, with so much land and so many people, was always teetering on the brink of collapse. There was too much he didn't understand. But there was one thing he should have understood, yet never did. Those peasants rebelled not because they were born rebels, but because they could no longer survive. When a man can't even get a meal, what does he have left to fear? He has already lost everything. Rebellion is his only way out. Even death is better than starving to death. This is why the peasant armies could never be wiped out. As long as the famine continues, as long as the people are still starving, peasant armies will keep emerging endlessly. Kill 1 Li Zikeng, and 10 Li Zikengs will rise. Kill 10 Li Zikengs, and 100 Li Zikengs will rise. This was a war destined to be unwinnable, unless the court could solve the famine problem, giving the people food to eat, clothes to wear, and a way to survive. But the Chongzhen emperor couldn't do this. He had no money, no grain, no ability. His empire was already riddled with holes, teetering on the brink of collapse. He himself could barely hold on. How could he have any strength left to provide relief to those starving people? And so this war continued endlessly. The imperial army suppressed the peasant armies. The peasant armies fled, lay low, then rose again, round and round, over and over and over, until the day this empire completely collapsed. In the winter of the 12th year of Chongzhen, news came from Henan. A great drought in Henan. This was already the third consecutive year of severe drought. The fields yielded nothing, rivers dried up to their beds, and even well water couldn't be drawn. The people ate through their stored grain, ate through tree bark and grass roots, and began eating dirt. Eating it could temporarily fill their stomachs, but it couldn't be digested, and in the end they would die from bloating. Hunger spread through Henan like a plague. People in the village died one after another, corpses piled up by the roadside, left unburied. The living were gaunt and sallow like ghosts wandering the wilderness, searching for anything to fill their stomachs. Some began to eat people. The history books recorded this year's tragedy in brief words. Great famine, people ate each other, the dead lay in heaps. Behind these 12 characters were countless shattered families, countless lost lives, countless unspeakable tragedies. And on this starving land, people began to sing a folk song. Eat his mothers, wear his mothers. Open the gates to welcome the Chuang King. When the Chuang King comes, we pay no grain. This folk song spread from one village to another, from one county town to another, until it spread throughout all of Henan. The starving people were waiting for a savior, and that savior was walking toward them. From the 13th to 14th year of Chongzhen, 1640-1641, add in the 13th year of Chongzhen, Li Zeking led his army into Henan. This was a land devastated by famine, 3 years of great drought. Not a single grain harvested. Tragedies of people eating each other could be seen everywhere. When Li Zikang's banners appeared on the horizon, the starving masses flocked to him. Open the gates to welcome the Chuang King. When the Chuang King comes, we pay no grain. This folk song became Li Zikang's most powerful weapon. He announced equal distribution of land and exemption from taxes, promising that those who followed him would have food to eat, land to farm, and pay no grain for 3 years. For those who had already lost everything, this was an irresistible temptation. Li Zikang's forces grew like a rolling snowball, from tens of thousands to 100,000, from 100,000 to hundreds of thousands. He was no longer that defeated general with only 18 riders left, but a warlord commanding 1,000,000 men. In the first month of the 14th year of Chongzhen, Li Zikang captured Luoyang. Living in Luoyang was Prince Fu Zhuchang's son, the Wanli Emperor's most beloved son. His princely mansion was piled high with gold, silver, and jewels, and his granaries were filled with aged grain. Meanwhile, outside the city walls, the common people were starving to death. On the day the city fell, Prince Fu was captured. Li Zikang ordered Prince Fu's execution and distributed his wealth to the starving people. It was said that soldiers discovered millions of taels of silver and mountains of grain in Prince Fu's mansion. When the news spread, the realm was shaken, a prince executed by a peasant army. This was unprecedented in Ming Dynasty history. It proclaimed to the world, this empire's authority had collapsed and the old order was crumbling. When news of Luoyang's fall reached the front lines, Yang Xichang, who was pursuing Zhang Xianzhong, was overcome with grief and indignation. His 10-sided net plan had completely failed. Zhang Xianzhong roamed freely across Huguang. Li Zichang captured cities and seized territory in Henan, and he could attend to neither, accomplishing nothing. In the 3rd month of the 14th year of Chongzhen, Yang Xichang died of illness in Shashi. Some say he died of grief and indignation. Others say he took poison to end his own life. Regardless, this minister of war who had once ambitiously vowed to sweep away the bandits in one stroke, ultimately departed this world filled with regret. His death marked the complete failure of the Ming Dynasty's efforts to exterminate the peasant armies. The 15th to 16th year of Chongzhen, 1642-1643 AD, in the 15th year of Chongzhen, Li Zicheng besieged Kaifeng 3 times. Kaifeng was the provincial capital of Henan, a strategic stronghold of the Central Plains. Li Zicheng was determined to take it, while the Ming army defended it to the death. Both sides fought back and forth beneath the city walls, with countless casualties. During the 3rd siege, the Yellow River dikes broke. The overwhelming floodwaters engulfed Kaifeng, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians perished beneath the waves. This ancient city of 1,000 years was transformed into a watery wasteland overnight. No one knows who breached the dikes. Some say it was the imperial army, others say it was the peasant army. But regardless, this man-made disaster wiped Kaifeng off the map. In the 16th year of Chongzhen, the Chongzhen emperor appointed Sunday Chuanting for one final gamble. Sunday Chuanting was the last capable military commander of the late Ming Dynasty. He had defeated the peasant armies multiple times in Shanxi and was known as Sunday the King of Hell. But this time, he faced a Li Zikang who was no longer what he once was. In October, Sunday Chuanting led his army out of the pass and fought a decisive battle against Li Zikang at Jiaxian. The Ming army was utterly defeated, and Sunday Chuanting died in battle. When news of his death reached Beijing, the Chongzhen emperor refused to believe it. He thought Sunday Chuanting had faked his death to escape and refused to grant any posthumous honors. But the truth was, Sunday Chuanting was indeed dead. He was the Ming Dynasty's last barrier, and his death meant the empire had no more usable troops. The history books say, when Chuanting died, the Ming fell. The 17th year of Chongzhen, 1644 AD, Beijing. In the first month of the 17th year of Chongzhen, Li Zicheng proclaimed himself emperor in Xi'an, naming his dynasty Dashun. Then he led a 1,000,000-strong army marching toward Beijing. Cities along the way surrendered at the mere sight of his forces, with defending generals defecting one after another. Li Zicheng encountered virtually no real resistance. Sweeping through like a force of nature, on the 17th day of the third month, the Dashun army arrived at the gates of Beijing. The Chongzhen emperor climbed Coal Hill, gazing at the dark masses of enemy troops outside the walls. Speechless for a long time, he knew it was all over. On the 18th day of the third month, the outer city fell. At dawn on the 19th day of the third month, the Chongzhen emperor hanged himself on a crooked tree on Coal Hill. He left behind a final edict. Since I ascended the throne 17 years ago, rebels have pressed directly upon the capital, though my virtue is thin and my conduct unworthy. Bringing down heaven's punishment, it is all because my ministers have failed me. In death, I have no face to meet my ancestors in the underworld. I remove my crown and cover my face with my hair. Let the rebels dismember my body as they will, but harm not a single one of my people. When he died, only one eunuch, Wang Chenggen, was by his side. The great Ming dynasty thus came to its end. After Li Zikang entered Beijing, he stayed for only 42 days. He was unable to establish a new dynasty. Outside Shanhai Pass, Wu Sangui invited the Qing army through the pass inside the city. The Dashun army's discipline had collapsed, losing the people's support. On the 22nd of April, Li Zikang was defeated by the Qing army at Shanhai Pass. He fled Beijing in panic, retreating westward all the way. The following year, he was killed by local militia at Zhugong Mountain in Hubei, ending his legendary yet brief life. Zhang Shang established the Daxi regime in Sichuan, but it too was destroyed by the Qing army a few years later. In the end, it was neither Li Zikang nor Zhang Shanzhong who conquered the Central Plains, but the Manchu Qing from beyond the pass. This is the story of the peasant wars at the end of the Ming dynasty. From the first cry in northern Shanxi in the 7th year of Tianqi, to the fall of Beijing in the 17th year of Chongzhen, 17 years of war, 17 years of blood and tears, 17 years of struggle and destruction. Li Zikang rose from an ordinary postal courier to become the warlord who overthrew the Ming dynasty, only to vanish in the torrent of history. His story tells us, when a dynasty loses the people's hearts, when the common folk can no longer survive, even the mightiest empire will come crashing down. The wheel of history rolls ever forward, crushing countless heroes and warlords, and crushing the fates of countless ordinary people as well. But those stories, those people, those souls struggling in the darkness will never be forgotten. Good night. May you drift peacefully into dreams within the long river of history.